Hey Bobcat, where you been? The uploads have slowed and the channel seems dead. What gives? Honestly, viewers, I'm tired. In the last year I've made a number of major career moves that have left me with very little time for content creation. On the rare occasions I do have time, my mind is elsewhere. But I'm back, for better or worse, and I'm trying to get back into the swing of things. I thought I'd do so with a game from one of my closest friends, Gwen. You may know her as the unofficial channel artist and one of the guests on Game Night. Well, she's also a game dev, and this is her first project, Roadkill Agora. Roadkill Agora is aesthetically in the same vein as the Pagan and Hexcraft series which I covered previously. It uses a very similar low-poly graphic style and has assets that wouldn't look out of place in that series. Gameplay-wise, though, I'd actually say it's very different. Combat takes a backseat to exploration, in what I think the lazy and boring might call a walking simulator. I hate that term because it essentially ignores the fact that first-person puzzlers, platformers, and point-and-clicks were once thriving genres in a time before everything had to be dull and brown. The whole game thumbs its nose at many modern conventions. There seems to be this very toxic idea that every game should be aspiring and working towards some abstract AAA aesthetic that changes every few years. You see it on Twitter every time a Nintendo game comes out. Incredulous people wonder how they still sell when Pokemon Legends Arceus doesn't look as good as Horizon Zero Dawn. And I firmly believe it comes from the mistaken belief that a game's quality can be measured in any kind of objective terms. I've ranted at length about how review scores destroy our ability to create art and are actively damaging how it's produced, and I think a lot of that stems from the idea that there are games that are objectively good, or at least objectively better than others. The short version of my viewpoint is that the purpose of art is to evoke emotion. Those emotions can be joy, fear, anger, or really anything the audience takes from a work. Those emotions are inherently subjective in nature and function pretty independently of polygon counts, resolution, and frame rate. To that end, I think Roadkill Agora and the Oleander Garden games evoke a very retro sensibility, not just in the graphics, but also in the way that they're made. In the 80s and 90s, we saw a revolution in movies. There was this flood of films made by average folks. We saw all kinds of low-budget horror and action and romance movies, most of which were terrible, but some of which are still remembered fondly to this day. What changed is that video cameras reached a point where they were affordable to the average person or small company. If not to own, then at least to rent. Suddenly, the power to make movies was in the hands of the masses. None of this supplanted the big-budget stuff that was coming out, but it led to a kind of proto-YouTube where we gained insight into the minds of our neighbors without the filter of the Hollywood process. This kind of raw emotion has, I think, been seen in the indie game space, especially in the last 10 years or so. What's changed? Well, the tools to make games have been made available to everyone. RenP, RPG Maker, Unity, Unreal, all of these have tools that can allow basically anyone to become a game dev. I got to watch as one summer friend of the channel Manwords made his first foray into developing a visual novel, After School Murder Club. What's going on with Roadkill Agora is a very punk mentality. While I'm sure Gwen would have loved to have all the time and money in the world on this project, I don't think that if she did it would in any way resemble a modern AAA game. To me, AAA isn't necessarily something studios should aspire to. The way those games get made is by selling them to investors. Investors want a return, and when that happens, the game must look good to impress in the trailers to drive pre-orders. It must have some voice talent they can hang their hats on and create a wide scope, maybe a celebrity from whatever show is in vogue at the time. The aesthetics must be polished, the soundtrack must be just right, and after all that, maybe there will be time for the actual core gameplay. Even then it's about trend chasing. What's big? Minecraft. Great, so the game has to have crafting elements then, and also some RPG elements, and by that I just mean a perk system because we have strayed so far from actual RPGs at this point that it's laughable. The game has to be an open world, even though there's really no more than 5 to 10 hours of content, but you can pad that out with some side activities and a commute and stretch it out 3 or 4-fold, not to mention all the DLC that you can then sell. Why put time and effort into a new type of relationship when Westerners relate just fine to father-child relationships? It's an easy win, it's easy to write, everyone can take the role of a middle-aged dad taking care of a child. What's interesting is that in previous years, the child would be the audience surrogate rather than the dad, but we have to reverse it to evoke a more mature aesthetic, and force that parental instinct whether people actually care about the child or not. And the annoying thing is it'll make millions. But that's not what's happening in Roadkill Agora. Who are you? Who cares? Where are you? Irrelevant. What's the plot? It kind of doesn't matter. What this game is about is the vibes. I railed against people trying to game theory the Oleander Garden games, and here I want to double down on that. Games like this aren't some riddle to be uncovered, though there is some definite symbolism. They're not traditionally structured narratives. They're, in many ways, a primal yell. They're a game dev trying to make a statement. Whether that statement will resonate with you depends on how you view that statement. Obviously, a game like this takes a lot of time and effort, and I don't want to diminish that, but there's also a very raw and impulsive nature to it. It's about the issues surrounding the author. What's the game about? I mean, it's about walking around at night. It's about looking at all the countercultural symbols around you and realizing they're just set dressing. People are still dying at the hands of a racist and corrupt government, despite all of the anti-police symbolism in the game, and these protests against that have been happening for decades, and the brutality continues. It's outrageous, it's unfair, and in your impotent rage, all you can really do is go out and walk. Smoke a cigarette, take it all in, and wonder what the point or purpose is. Pagan autogeny isn't about the specific symbolism and what each item and monster represent. It's not about a linear timeline of events. Pagan and Hexcraft are about the alienation, the euphoria, the dysphoria, the confusion, and the small victories people face when their identity has been supplanted by one that aligns more with how they themselves identify, but with which they now need to come to grips. To me, games like this protest against the firm rules that we want to set forth. Do games need to have a win state or a fail state? No, of course not. Don't be ridiculous. Because art doesn't work like that. Art isn't about winning, it's not about overcoming. What it's about is evoking emotion. Where have I been? I went for a drive. I was going out to the mountains to stargaze, and a storm rolled in as I reached my destination. I wasn't able to see anything but distant lightning, and I spent about 5 hours on the back roads in a sports car, only stopping at a 24-hour gas station to refuel and get a milkshake in the wee hours of the morning. It's not a narratively satisfying story, but it's one that I'll remember. So as I said at the beginning, I'm back. I'm gonna try to be making more videos, not gonna commit to a schedule because I'm terrible at keeping those, but I'm gonna try this again, and I hope that you'll join me for it. Like and subscribe and do all the other things that help the channel grow, and above all, take care.